In this session, we'll begin to continue to look at the ways in which academic scholarship of the Bible has affected our understanding of the most sacred book in Judaism. Up until the modern period, with very few exceptions, it was generally understood that the Torah is a single document dictated by God to Moses, and that the text we have today is absolutely identical to the one delivered at Mount Sinai. Biblical scholars, including the classical Mefarshim, the commentators, understood this, and they had their answers to explain what seemed to be contradictions. In a later session, we're going to utilize a method developed by Nechama Leibovitz, one of the greatest Bible teachers of the 20th century, in which he invited pupils to examine differences in approach by these commentators. Among them, it was Abraham ibn Ezra, who on occasion will drop a hint that perhaps a text is problematic. But his typical response was to say, "There is a secret, and the wise one will keep silent." Or he might end, "The intelligent will understand." That's different from other classical Mefarshim, who assume that the traditional understanding mentioned above is the only way to understand the Bible. While Ibn Ezra is firmly rationalistic, others are more mystical, for example, the Ramban. And Rashi, esteemed as the leading Parshan, combines an interest in all four ways of interpreting the Torah: Pshat, the plain or literal meaning; Drash, the homiletical meaning; Remez, the allegorical meaning; and Sod, the mystical meaning. Baruch Spinoza was the first leading Jewish intellectual to openly question the divine origin of the Torah and its status as a unified document. The major thrust was that of the Ramban and others who offered ingenious explanations of apparent contradictions. For example, the last 12 Pesukim of Sefer Devarim describe the death and burial of Moses. How could Moses have written that? The answer was that Moses was a prophet, the greatest of Jewish prophets, and he could write about the future. If there seemed to be contradictions in the text, midrashic material could be incorporated to clear up the problem. On rare occasions, a Jew would point to what seemed to be anachronisms. For example, in the 11th century, Isaac ibn Yashush in Spain pointed out that a list of Edomite kings that appears in chapter 36 of Breshit includes kings who lived long after Moses had died. His suggestion that someone else had written that was not well received by Jews. Initial expressions, what came to be known as critical biblical study of the Bible, took place in the Christian community, with Catholic Church officials suggesting other theories of authorship. The Church officially resisted these interpretations. There are places, for example, where the words ad hayom hazeh, the same thing is done even today, is mentioned, and that seems to be post-Moses. In addition, Moses is called the humblest person on earth, hardly something he would have written about himself. There were also doublets, stories that are told twice or even three times. In these doublets, sometimes each version would refer to God by a different name, usually the Tetragrammaton, the Shem HaMeforash in one place, and Elohim in another. In the 18th century, a German minister, H.B. Witter, a French doctor, Jean Estruc, and a German professor, J.G. Eichhorn, concluded that where there were these doublets, they had to be written after Moses. The documentary hypothesis was most fully developed by Karl Heinrich Graf, William Vatke, and most importantly, Julius Wellhausen in the 19th and 20th century. Wellhausen systematized and summed up the works of these predecessors. He taught that the Torah contains 4 sources. One, called J, because it features the Tetragrammaton. One called E, because it refers to God as Elohim. One, the largest source, called P, because it focused a lot of attention on priestly matters, but was also characterized by an elevated style. For example, chapter 1 of Genesis. And one called D, which refers to the book of Deuteronomy, which has a distinctive style and also contains laws not found elsewhere. For example, permission to eat meat outside the sanctuary, and the requirement that sacrifice be offered only in the designated place, understood by Jews as Jerusalem and by Samaritans as Shechem, Nablus. Now, of course, these views are not accepted by Orthodox Jews, and there are many disagreements among those who accept the basic framework. For example, which source was edited last? Was it P or was it D? In addition, many scholars see chapters 17 to 26 of Vayikra, which keeps repeating the word Kadosh and is marked by a proliferation of laws present in a highly compact manner, and also the introductory and concluding psukim of this section strengthen the sense that it constitutes a distinct unit, and therefore they refer to that source as H, holiness. To summarize, the support offered by those who accept the basic outlines of the documentary hypothesis, they say there is linguistic support. Both J and E share a basically common vocabulary, while P, D, and H employ other words at times. Terminology, some words appear only or disproportionately in certain sources. Consistent content, certain concepts, objects, and practices are specific to certain sources. Connections with other parts of the Bible. For example, there are clear connections between Deuteronomy and the book of Jeremiah. Let me reiterate that all of this is not accepted in the Orthodox community, and I recommend to you the work of Professor Umberto Cassuto, a distinguished biblical scholar who wrote books intended to refute the basic idea. Those of you who can handle the Hebrew text are also encouraged to read the commentary on the Chumash published by Mossad Harav Kook. So let me close with some questions. What difference does all of this make in your understanding of the Torah? Should we apply the same criteria in analyzing the Torah that we do with secular and even great literature? If so, what risks do we run? If we do not, what risks do we run? Shalom.